Okay, this is lesson 12 of whole numbers. We're talking about decimals, their operations, and rounding them. The first place we see them is with money. So if we have one little square is equal to 1 penny. 10 of them would be 10 pennies. And here we've got 10 squares by 10 squares. That equals 100 together total. Well, 100 pennies is equal to $1. Okay, so 100 pennies equals $1. So if I wanted to say I've got 1 penny out of 100, that would literally be written as a fraction. You have 1 penny out of 100 pennies that makes $1. Now, how would I draw that? Well, if I wanted to shade it on a diagram, I would only shade just one square. That would show me 1 penny out of 100 pennies. So again, you would draw the grid. Okay, so you would draw, it's called a 10 by 10 grid. Okay, and that's what you would draw. And then you'd be able to shade in however many they tell you. On the next one, they want us to tell us how we write the numbers now. So in money, this is how we would write it for money. Money is going to be written this way. So either writing for dollars or you're writing for cents. Both are correct, but you can't mix them up. So you can't go 0.01 cents. Okay, that's got to have a dollar sign in front of it. Okay, so what I mean is you can't go like this. Oops, with a zero. That would be wrong. That's written in dollar form. So you wouldn't have the cent sign there. You would have the dollar sign there. That's the difference between those. Okay. All right. Now let's take a look at the next one. If we take a look at what we're dividing all of these pictures into, we're dividing them into 100, which is the bottom number. And we also find our bottom numbers for that is going to be for percentages. So if we want to find percentages of how you did on your quizzes or your assignments, it's all going to be calculated out of 100. So if I want to talk about money, this next one, I've got 24 squares shaded. Okay, so I've got 24 squares shaded. Well, that means I've got 24 cents. I can write it this way, or I can write it as a dollar, put a dollar and then my decimal. The dollar and the decimal form are almost identical. The only difference is the dollar form literally puts the dollar sign. That's the only difference. This one is fraction form. So again, fractions are always out of 100 when we're talking about decimal form. Now, how would we say it? We're going to notice our decimal places now are different. So we've got decimals. We've been dealing with our decimal place over here. And we've been dealing with the ones, place value, the tens, place value, and the hundreds. But over here, you're going to notice hundreds has a D and then an S. This one is different because it has THS. The minute you see THS, we can flip the page. That means we're on the right-hand side of the decimal place now. Okay, so that's what that's telling us, is we're moving to the right of the decimal. So our decimal is here. This is our tenths, dimes. So this number would be out of 10. This number is going to be out of 100. Okay? And that's how we would find it. So we have tenths places and hundredths places. Yeah. So let's take a look at the bottom shading there. So 79 cents can be written with 79 shaded squares. Okay, we can write it as 79 cents or with the dollar sign. And then we put 0.79. Now this 0.79 decimal form, this is decimal form, is almost identical to the money form. The only difference with the money form, all they do different is they just put this dollar sign in front of the decimal form. That's all they do. So the decimal form is identical to money form. Okay, they just put the dollar sign in. So let's take a look at the next page when they talk about what place values we have. So if I'm looking at money in value in dimes and pennies, so we see 57 cents. That means I would have 5 dimes, 7 pennies. So out of 100, it would be 57 out of 100. What if I had this? What if I had 0.93? What would I have for each of those? 0.93. Where would I put those numbers? So how many dimes would I have if I had 0.93? How many dimes would I have? 8. Seriously. So I've got 0.93 on the bottom. So the first number goes in the 10 spot. That's my dimes. This is my 10th spot. Pennies, I've got my 3. That means I'll have 3 pennies. So this is going to give me 93 over 100. Okay, it's going to give me 93 over 100. I would write that as 0.93, and I would write 90 dash 3 hundredths. THS. You got to have the THS on it. A lot of you aren't spelling some of your words. You need to spell hundredths very clearly. It has to have that THS. So for example, on some of your assignments, some of you were doing like, if it was in the hundredths place, some of you were putting 100, or if it was in the thousands, some of you did thousands like that. You can't abbreviate anymore, folks, especially because we have a THS on the end now. The THS on the end tells us we're on the right-hand side of the decimal. That's the difference. Okay, it's a big difference. Okay, so continuing on, it says, if you have only pennies and no dimes, you're going to see a 0 there. So if you have no dimes, you put a 0 there. Okay, so no dimes is a 0. The next one, what if you don't have any pennies left? So what if you have 20 dimes? 20 dimes means you need to have 0 in this spot. He's a placeholder. And why is he a placeholder? Because it's telling you have dimes. And dimes is out of 10. So that would mean you have 20 cents. You've got 2 dimes. Okay? So we have 2 dimes on this one. All right, let's take a look at the check. It says pay to the order of, and then we need to sign the check. So it says you can be writing in digits or in words. Now look at what they do with the digits. What happens with the numbers after the decimal place? Here's what we notice. After the decimal place, they're going to write it as a fraction on the end. When we had our checks in the first couple lessons, they were whole numbers. So all we did was we did this and put an XX. The reason we put XX at the end is because we were saying there were no pennies and dimes. That's what the XX means. It means no pennies and dimes, it's all dollars. But now this is saying we have pennies and dimes. If I have pennies and dimes, I can't write the XX there. So now we would actually write it as a fraction. Okay, you wouldn't put the XX and we wouldn't put that line there. The line would go in front and it would go after the fraction. Okay, and then you would sign it yourself. Okay, so you put your signature on. All right, turn your page. So, expressing in word form. Expressing decimals in numbers and word form. When we read decimals, the decimal can be expressed by saying, by saying decimal, point, or and. The minute you put the word and in a sentence, it means a decimal point. So if I say 5 and 6/10, that means 5 and 6. That's what that's telling you the minute you use the word and. Okay, so now we're going to look at an example. Here's a really big number. We have taken and we have put it in the place value form. The 5, 3, and 7 are after the decimal point. So they are in the tenths, hundredths, and thousands. Hopefully you're noticing there's only one that says ones. The ones is on the left of the decimal and it's right beside it. So this guy is right beside the decimal. All of the other ones on the right-hand side, you should notice have a THS on the end. Okay, so all of the other ones have a THS on. So now we're taking a look at, again, we're seeing the words. Which words are they using? And, decimal, or point. Okay, we see another number. They've placed it in our place value chart. And how are we going to say it? If our last number is in hundredths, it is going to be hundredths at the end. Zeros are placeholders. So if we have no tenths, this is saying we have no dimes. That's what this means. If you have no number there, that's no dimes. Okay, so you have to put a placeholder there. If you've got pennies but no dimes, you need to put a placeholder. And zeros are placeholders. Okay, turn your page, please. When we compare decimals, okay, we're screaming through this stuff. It doesn't take long. When we compare them, we want to see which numbers are bigger. So when we compare them, you're going to look at the numbers 10 versus 7. So I've got the number 10 and the number 7. Those are the numbers you're looking at. Who is bigger? The 10 is bigger, so it's opening the mouth to the 10. That's what's going on there. So 10 cents is bigger than 7 cents. If you need to draw the diagram, you can draw the diagram. Okay, so you can draw pictures if you need to draw pictures. This guy would be 10 out of 100 versus 7 out of 100. Which one's bigger? The 10. Over here, you've got 67 out of 100 versus 62 out of 100. Who is bigger? The 67. Okay, so again, you're just comparing the numbers. And again, you can draw them. You could draw them. If it's out of 10, your first number, if it's out of 1. So for example, if you've got one digit after the decimal, that's going to be in the tenths place. So that means you've got 7 out of 10, and that's how much should be shaded. And on this one, you've got 4 out of 10 shaded squares. And if you were now looking at both objects, you're looking at the first object and the second object, this guy has more squares shaded. So since he has more squares shaded, this guy is bigger. Okay, so whichever one has the most squares shaded, it is going to be the larger one.
It has more shaded.
It's got more shaded, so he's bigger. All right. If we talk about on the bottom here, it says 50 cents. We can express 50 cents as 0.50 or 0.5. 0.5 because that means we have 5 dimes. Okay. So what they've done is they've actually rounded it. They haven't put the place value for the pennies in there. They're telling us we have no pennies. We only have dimes. So this is saying dimes only. This one is showing us dimes and 0 pennies. Exactly. So this one's showing us the dimes and the 0 pennies. But if you've got the 0 pennies, you don't need the placeholder. So it can be written both ways. And this is an example of rounding.
Pac-Man rounding.
Okay, this is an example of rounding. Turn your page. All right. So now we're talking about the number 0.5 and 0.30. Well, if we were to shade the squares, and if I had the squares 1 to 10, and I had to shade them, which one's going to have more shaded? Well, this guy here is going to have, if I were to shade them, this guy's going to have 5 shaded. Over here, this guy's going to have 3 shaded. So you can take a look and see which ones have more shaded blocks. So this guy's got more shaded squares. So we would say the 50 or the 0.5 is bigger. Okay. So again, we're only dividing it out of 10 spaces. That's 5 out of 10 spaces. Okay, that's what we're talking about. It's 5 out of 10. Okay, out of 10 spaces. That's what we're talking about there. Now, take a look at the bottom one. Take a look at this one. We're going to compare, look at where the decimals are. One of them says pennies and one of them says dimes. Which one is telling us pennies? Which one's telling us pennies? I'm looking at this example. Starting over here. So if we're going to compare two numbers, this one's got 0.07 and the other one's got 0.7. Which one's talking dimes and which one's talking pennies? Which one is dimes and which one's pennies? What do you think?
The first one is talking
What do you think that one's talking about?
dimes, and then the second one is talking pennies.
That's it. That's the decimal places. I want the digits. So this one here is dimes. You are correct. And this one's pennies.
Sorry.
Now, which one tells us only pennies and which one tells us only dimes? On my two examples that I have circled in blue, which one says only pennies? The first one. Okay, so we look at the very first number. The very first number is only pennies. How come? Because it's got a 0 where the dimes are. It says 0 dimes. Okay, so it says 0 dimes, 7 pennies. The second one is saying 7 dimes. Now, which is more money, a dime or a penny? Dimes are more. So the 7 dimes are bigger than the pennies. And that's what they're showing, is that the 7 dimes are bigger than the pennies. Okay, that's the difference in the numbers. Yeah.
So size does matter.
Size always matters.
That's what she said.
It's dimes and pennies. It's talking money, folks. We're talking money.
Oh.
So look at the next example.
Like big slums.
Guys,
My bad.
play. Okay, so now we're comparing dimes and pennies. When you put them together in here, you can take a look. When the numbers are the same in front, you have to look at the second number and the first number after the decimal places. So if I look at the numbers after the decimal, the number with the bigger number next to the decimal is biggest. So that means I'm looking at the numbers with the 3s. So 3 is bigger than the 0. So now I know this number is the smallest. So I'm going to cross them out because I know that guy is the smallest. Now I want to find out who is the biggest number. Between the two that we've got up here, which one is the biggest? If I've got identical numbers, I look at the next one to the right. The next one to the right, and you check and see who's bigger. 1 is bigger than 0, so that means this number is your largest number. So this guy is your biggest number, okay? So when your numbers are identical, you line them up with your decimal places, pushing play. So if I'm not sitting with you, this is how we do comparing numbers. So you line them up with their decimal point, and that is the first thing you got to remember is to line up the decimal places. So if I wanted to check between, example, if I've got the numbers 6.47 and 6.74, and I want to know who's bigger, you take a look and line them up with their decimal points. So I've lined them up. Here's the decimal. And I look at each number starting on the far left. So starting on the far left, the 6s are the same. These guys are the same, so that means I need to look at the very next number. And I'm looking at the 7 and the 4. Whichever number is bigger, this number is bigger than 4. Okay, he's bigger than the 4 right here. So since he's bigger than the number right below him, that means this number is the bigger number. That's how you can tell. But you need to line up the decimal places, okay? And that will help you. Okay, rounding decimals. Again, when you're rounding decimals, you talk about the numbers after the decimal point. When we round them, if it says rounding to the nearest whole number, you're rounding to these numbers. Those are the whole numbers. If you're rounding to decimal places, what you do is you take a look. Anything from 0 to 4, it stays the same. If it's 5 to 9, you're going to add 1. Okay? If it's 5 to 9, you add 1. That's called rounding up. Okay? So if you say you round up, that means you're adding 1 to that one place value, only to that place value. Okay? Only to that place value. Okay? It's only to that place value. You're not rounding every digit. You're only rounding some of them. So I want to round 2.7 to a whole number. It's past the number 5. Anything past the number 5, you're going to round to 3. So that guy would round to 3. Let's take a look if I've got the number 1.3.
Bro, can you stop that? Bro?
What if I've got the number 1.3? We're doing one more example. 1.3 on this number line. Where would I round him to? You got to locate him. 1.3 is located right there.
On the third notch.
Right, he's the third notch. And because he's less than halfway, he's going to round down to 1.